chapter 1. I want to depress everyone to start with, just a blanket depression for everybody, and then hopefully by the end of Ecclesiastes, we'll follow Solomon into a little less bleak area. The purpose and the meaning of life is a question that has been asked since people forgot about God, frankly. It is the heart of all philosophy. It seems to be the heart and the basis for all personal inquest. It is something that all of us search for to some degree. And whenever you start looking at the meaning of life and the purpose of life, you come to an area of depression. And Solomon does that. He starts off his letter or his book in Ecclesiastes with the most dreary of terms that you can come up with, the purposelessness of life. He says in verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all of the toil at which he works under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down. It hastens the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. And around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run into the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the stream flows, there it flows again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with his hearing. What has been done is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done again. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been done in ages before. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things, yet to be among those who come after. Solomon gets further on into Ecclesiastes and further into his despair and further into his depression to get over into chapter 3 to make the point that there is one single event that happens in everyone's life that makes life individually and on a grand scale meaningless. And that's death. Death and time make all of life pointless. That is the conclusion that he comes to chapter after chapter after chapter in Ecclesiastes. Is what you do on this life is going to be done by someone else after you. And what you have achieved here is something that's already been achieved by someone before you. And the great accomplishments that you have are the accomplishments that someone else has already had and someone else in the future will have again. And if you look at chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, that's kind of the point that he makes, is that everything happens on a secular pattern. If we make peace in our time, in our country, that peace is going to be ruined by somebody else and then remade by somebody else. If we achieve something great as our nation, it's happened before by some other nation, and it'll happen again at some point in time in the future, if there is enough future to have it happen again. On an individual scale, whatever knowledge we gain, you're going to lose it in the grave. You know, for all of the home education, all of the public education, all of the higher learning, no offense, master's degree people, eventually that knowledge is going to be pointless. Whatever money that you gain, whatever possessions that you acquire, when you are dead and gone, as all of us will be, that'll be passed on to somebody else and maybe thrown into a junkyard or into a heap or a pile, put into a museum, and then eventually lost to time. Even the character and the person that you are is pointless when you're like Rover and you're dead all over. Solomon comes back to this point over and over and over in Ecclesiastes, that with the meaningless of life, it makes life rather unbearable. It's hard to deal with. It's hard to get up every day and recognize that, I'm going to die. And the work that I go to and I work at, and the money that I earn and the things that I buy with that money, all of that's just going to be gone anyways. And the people that I talk to and communicate with and the people that I encourage and help and try to be nice to or vengeful towards. Whatever I do to them or for them or with them, all of that's going to be lost to the sands of time anyways. And at some point in time in our self-recollection, all of our self-introspection, most of us have come to this point at some point in our reasoning. What's the point? What's the point of doing it all? What's the point of the rat race? What's the point of achieving all that we're going to try to achieve? And we find ways to try to eliminate that mindset in order to find some point to life as a whole. Work sometimes is the answer. People who throw themselves into work, I'm going to do the very best job that I can in whatever work that I have, or the hobbies that I like to do. I'm going to really devote myself to that. Or the gaining of money, that has become the life pursuit of many people. I'm going to get as much money as I can, and that's going to make all of the other pointlessness somehow okay. I'm going to soothe that despair that I have in the back of my mind that death makes things pointless by achieving a great amount of money or accomplishments. Maybe not everyone throws themselves into work and not everybody runs after money, but sometimes it's accomplishments. I want to make a great piece of work of art or compose a really great piece of music or buildings that will live long after me. Some mark on this world that when world history comes around, they'll say in the 22nd century, 21st, and whatever century that we are in, it's been a long year already. That, Chad, he did something. Here's this musical piece that stands up beside Beethoven and Mozart, and, this is going to live on well long after him. Sometimes we move on into world records. This is going to be, I'm going to put my name on history. I'm going to be the tallest person that ever lived. I'm going to be the strongest person that ever lived. I'm going to be the first person to juggle dishwashers or whatever it is that people do to make a world record so that their name gets put into a book and they're remembered long after. Sometimes it's environmental work. That's been a big thing recently. It's, I'm not going to be around forever to enjoy this world, but I'm going to do all that I can to make this world last for the next generation. I'm going to make sure that this world is as good as it can be for all the generations after. Sometimes it's political movements. That's been a big thing in the last ever, that we're going to make politics something that's super important. And by our social and economic changes and having social justice and humanitarian works, we're going to make an impact on this world. And that's going to make that despair that's always lingering in the back of our minds, that's going to soothe that a little bit, and that's going to make life kind of okay. Now, if that becomes our goal, if that's what we look towards, if that's our solution for the pointlessness of life, then who do we look to? We usually look towards people who have the thing that we think that we're going to achieve and make life okay. We're going to look towards the wealthy around us. We're going to look up towards people who are powerful or influential, individuals who are gifted or skilled in whatever various activities. We're going to look towards those who are famous, those who live their life in excess and just sheer opulence. And those are the people that we're going to look to as our idols or as individuals to achieve things like them. And when looking towards them, we expect that they, by achieving the things that we're currently striving to achieve, that they have found the meaning of life, that they found a purpose of life, that they found the very thing that we think is going to make life kind of okay to live for us. And we feel that their life really is worth living while ours is maybe just a shadow and it's not quite as worth living, but theirs is really worth living when we feel that ours is not. We think that if we could just obtain what they have obtained, but achieve what they have achieved, then we won't feel the despair that we feel all that often. There's a half-truth. Reading a book by a famous preacher who was, summoned all around the world to go and talk to the rich and the powerful and the famous and the greatly skilled and gifted. And he said that the first few times he was awestruck. You go into a room with this president or this king, or you're brought into this group of princes, or this baseball player or this soccer player, and you have this, this time with him. He said it was terrifying the first few times. And then he said after about the first dozen, he realized that all of them are going to go exactly the same. He's going to get to teach to them or preach to them for a little bit. And then when the party dies down, he's going to be drawn into the back room by whoever invited him in the first place. And that person is always going to say the same thing, that my power or my wealth or my money has not given me a sense of purpose in my life. And then they want to talk to him privately about what is going to give that sense of purpose. What we see is only a half-truth. That people, they really do have the power and the influence and the money and the skills that we can only dream of. But what we don't see is the private side. Recognizing that even with the power and the influence and the wealth and the skills, they are just as tormented as we are. And maybe more so. Because after achieving the things that we think are going to soothe our soul, they realize that even that, when they reach the pinnacle of what life has to offer, still is empty. And the money and the power and the influence and all of the achievements, the possessions, the experiences, and everything else does not give them the fulfillment that they and we so desperately want in our lives. And that's where we get to the book of Ecclesiastes. Because Solomon does the very same thing through the entire book of Ecclesiastes. He starts off with this despair and this despondency in his life that so often we come to. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And then Solomon looks around him and says, well, let's not just stay here. That's just foolishness. Let's try to soothe that a little bit. Let's find purpose in life. And if there's anybody in all of world history to kind of be able to do that, Solomon's the man to do it. He doesn't have any great wars, so he doesn't have a lot of things to preoccupy him with. He's got the money and the influence and the power to do whatever he wants. And so he does. Remember back in 1 Kings chapter 3 that Solomon asked for wisdom to guide God's people, and he says, I'm going to give it to you. And then as you get further on into 1 Kings, God not only gave him depth of knowledge, but also breadth of knowledge in a way that nobody else before or after him has been. But even in that, here in chapter 1, Solomon said, here in verse 16, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over me in Jerusalem and before me. And my heart had great experiences of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I perceived that this also is but striving after wind. For in much wisdom there is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Solomon said that he thought maybe learning was going to be the thing that got him over that despair. Got him over feeling that life didn't really have a point or a purpose. And that's such an important point in our time because education has been one of the pinnacle things that life has, or that the world tells us this is going to make you feel better about you and make you feel better about the life that you have to live. That if you just learn enough, if you achieve enough academically, and that's going to be the thing. Go to your public education, or homeschooled education, sorry, Josh. Go on to college and then on to graduate school and then get your master's or your PhD or all the other things that I don't know a whole lot about. Get multiple letters at the end of your name, and then if you don't feel good enough about yourself, then get more multiple letters at the end of your name. And then be published in peer-reviewed publications, and then get published as an author of some degree, and then then the list kind of goes on and on and on. And Solomon says after he not only acquired great wisdom in verse 16 and surpassed all that were before him, he also makes the point in verse 17 that he then applied his heart to know more, to work to achieve more, to gain more. And then he said, and to know madness and folly, and he perceived that this is but striving after wind. For in much wisdom there is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. He said that learning just wasn't the answer. It didn't give him the purpose and the meaning of life. Because after he's dead, all that he knew is gone. And what he couldn't pass on to somebody else is gone as well. So he didn't stop there, though. In verse 4 of chapter 2, he says, I'm going to start building stuff. I'm going to make things that are going to last long, long after me. So he says in verse 4 of chapter 2, I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. Think of all of the great buildings of history. And Solomon has to be included in that list. You think of, the Colosseum or the Eiffel Tower, things that, make their mark on the world. Solomon's temple was one of them. If you go into 1 Kings, chapters 6 through 8, you have a list of all of the things that Solomon put into the temple. It was the most expensive building that has ever been made. Ever. Solomon says, I made it. And by the end of chapter 2, he gets to the point that it's still vanity and striving after wind. It still didn't give him purpose. And so he said, well, let's live in excess. In verses 1 down through verse 3 in chapter 2, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched in my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold of folly, until I might see what is good for the children of men to do under heaven during the few days of their life. His just life of excess was enough. Hedonism is something that has repeatedly been popular throughout history. Just enjoy all that you can for pleasure's sake. Solomon says, I did it. Go to parties, to enjoy a party, laugh, frolic, do all the things that you want, whatever pleasure man could buy or achieve or gain or experience. Solomon seems to have tried it. And he gets to the point very quickly in verse 1, but this is also vanity. And when he thought about it, he said, what's the point of laughing even? There is just no point in it. Or as you get a little bit further on, money and possessions. How much do we spend of our normal lives dreaming about what life would be like if we just had X, Y, or Z, or a whole bunch of X's and a whole bunch of Y's and all of the Z's that you could imagine? And Solomon does that. He mentions here that he had all the pleasures that he wanted, verses 1 through 3. Verses 4 down through verse 6, all the things that he had made. And then he gets into verse 7. I bought male and female servants. I had slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions and herds of flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, the treasures of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delights of the sons of man. I want us to kind of consider to the extent of which Solomon does what he says. 1 Kings gives a tally of just the physical weight of gold that is brought to Solomon on a yearly basis. And that's just as tribute, not to deal with all the explorers who go exploring or the miners who mine. It doesn't deal with the traders who trade. It doesn't even deal with the fact that they built a road for the sole purpose of bringing gold to Solomon. Whenever you have enough gold that you can build a road just to transport gold, you are ridiculously and stupidly rich. He is to the point where you could never spend that much money in a lifetime, and he sure tried. Just to give you that idea. Solomon says, I bought it, I did it, I had done it. All of that. And he makes the point in verse 9 that I became great, and I surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. And yet I haven't lost my wisdom. In all this, my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, and my heart found pleasure in all my toil. And this was my reward for my toil. And then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil that I had expended doing it, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained. after acquiring more money than any one person could spend in a lifetime, and then doing his uttermost to spend it all, he said it still wasn't enough. Well, how about work? We talked about that. I want to be somebody in my work. I want to achieve, some notoriety in my work. And Solomon says he really loved his work. I think he loved building things and making things. He liked the process of being king and organizing and keeping peace in the kingdom. He says in verse 10 of chapter 2, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, and my heart found pleasure in all of my toil. And that was my reward for my toil. And he'll state several times throughout the book that God does expect us to enjoy the work of our hand, to enjoy the process of work itself. But that's where we got to right there in verse 11, that I considered all that I've done, and even that was vanity. Now, we're not going to take the time to go through all of Ecclesiastes, and he itemizes kind of line by line through the entire book of why all of those things did not really give pleasure or purpose or meaning to life. And that's hard. It's hard to go through Ecclesiastes. There's a reason that we oftentimes shun the book as a whole. We usually skip right to the very end for a reason. Because as you go through this, you see your life. 3,000 years later, you still see yourself and say, well, he's right. Between death and disease, between oppression and sickness and madness, between all of the things that happen in life, what is the point? Well, I think we all know we're heading with this. Over in chapter 12, verses 13 to verse 14. At the end of the matter, when all has been heard, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Understanding that this life is not about learning or building or making great accomplishments or having luxury or opulence or living in decadence. It's not about the money or the possession or even work itself. Understanding that is paramount to, I think, good mental health. Life is about choosing God, fearing him, and then living to please him. Only with God is there purpose and meaning to life. You throw away God, you get rid of his commandments, you get rid of his purposes for you in your life, you might as well not wake up in the morning. And I don't mean that derisively, and I don't mean that as just give up hope right now. But if you sit back and you think logically, what is the purpose of ever living on this earth? If works do not last, if your memory doesn't last, if after you're dead and gone, all that you've ever achieved is forgotten about, what is the point? And I want you to think for a second, do you know the name of your grandparents? How about their parents? Could you name the name of all of them? We are, quite literally, we are 3 generations from being forgotten almost completely. If you can remember their name, you're doing better than most people. If you know their favorite food, or where they were born, where they're buried, what their favorite pastime was, you're doing far better than almost everybody. We are on the edge of being forgotten, and if that's all that we are, is just 60 years from being forgotten, what's the point of living in the first place? Solomon says that without God, which is kind of the overall view of the book, that if God does not exist, if you are not living according to his will and according to his purpose, then death itself makes life meaningless. Because only with God is there purpose and meaning to your existence. If you were made, then you were made for a purpose. If you were given gifts and abilities and skills, then you were given them to use them for a reason. Only in God is there reason to get up in the morning and go to work and to make the bed and to do the laundry and to teach the children and to tend to all the daily needs. only God gives that purpose. And in finding the purpose that God gives, it gives meaning to all the things that we do. All the things that once becomes drudgery and pointless, and the question of why would I ever do this in the first place, all of that individually begins to get meaning. The love of possessions and money are not for us, money and possessions are not for us. They are to share and to show love and care for one another. And why is it that I have all the things that I have in my life? Well, it's not just for me to enjoy, because if they were there only for me to enjoy, then it starts to lose pointlessness of life. But if they're there for me to share and to give and to show love through and care for one another, then that starts to gain a lot more meaning. All the pleasures in life are blessings from God. The work that we have is a gift for us and a blessing for those around us. Power and influence is not there to gain us honor and glory, but it's there to help protect and guard and aid others. Hopefully we see that in the leadership of the church. Hopefully we see that in the leadership of our homes, or the influence that we have, or the power that we have at work, whatever that case may be. Learning is not the end goal, but it is there to teach others and instruct others towards God. There are so many great blessings of having great knowledge and seeing further and deeper and seeing God's fingerprint in all of those things, and then being able to share that with somebody else. The accomplishment you have are not to give yourself the glory, but they're there to give God the glory for all that he has done, whether it's small accomplishments or, in worldly terms, great accomplishments. If I steal all of that glory and honor for myself, then of course there is no meaning or purpose. And so every day that we wake up and we think, oh man, my life just doesn't have a lot of meaning. What's the point of living today? And the answer is, if there was no God, then there would be no purpose. If we were transplanted here by aliens, or if we naturally evolved, then yeah, life is a whole lot of pointlessness. Vanity of vanity, all is vanity. But if we recognize, when we hear the end of the matter, when all has been heard, to fear God and to keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. That only with God is there purpose, only with him is there a reason to get up every morning and to do all the small things of life. Because with him, all those small things of life gain meaning. There's a purpose behind them. And it's not self-service, not self-glorification, but it's all to his glory and all to his honor. All to serve him in that way. Life is hard, but luckily it's short. There are going to be a lot of difficult things in life, a lot of difficult days, a lot of days of wondering, why is it that I have to go through what I have to go through? And Solomon invites us to see that behind all of the drudgery and all of the injustice, of all of what seems to be pointlessness, to see God giving you what you have in the time that you have it, in order to give him the glory and to serve one another. That is what he invites us to see through the entire book of Ecclesiastes. That without God, then the veneer is exactly what it is. Drudgery and pointlessness and despair. But with God, behind all of that is a purpose and meaning and a long-term plan that God has for us. When all has been heard, at the end of the matter, fear God and keep his commandments. To put yourself fully into his service. To look wholly not for our desires, but for his desires for you in your life. Life is hard, but luckily it's short. And the reward is long. Compared to what we go through now, the reward is everlasting. There is no reason to give up yet. No reason to quit now. A little while longer, and it's all over. But make sure that you fear God and keep his commandments. Make sure you are on his side to give life meaning and purpose. And if we can help you to do that in any way, we are all, maybe not in the same boat, but we're all in the same ocean. We all have our up days and our really, really down days. We all have good years and the worst years of our lives. We are all in this for one another, even if we're not all in the same boat. If we can help you in some way, let us know as we stand and sing the song that John has picked out for us.